All right, to start off our lessons for this week, we want you guys to practice something that we call the X game. And this is actually going to be an activity on Delta Math that you do after watching this lesson. So the purpose of the X game is to get you to think about what kind of numbers multiply to give you positive numbers, or what kind of numbers multiply to give you negative numbers. But at the same time, what kind of numbers would add to a positive or maybe add to a negative number? So these, this idea of like number sense and remembering your rules of operations with integers is going to help us do what we do in our next lesson, which is factoring. So before we get to factoring, we have to make sure we are good with multiplying and adding integers, so like positive and negative numbers. So when you log on to Delta Math and you start your assignment today, it's going to give you 10 problems called the X game, and it's going to ask you to write two numbers that multiply to the value at the top of the X and add to the value at the bottom of the X. So this is, I pulled these right from Delta Math, so this is what you're going to see when you log in. All right, so you are going to be looking for, like I said, numbers that multiply to the value at the top, and you can see there's a little X at the top and a plus sign at the bottom. We want numbers that multiply to them at the bottom. Now, some of these might be kind of easy for you, and some of them maybe you have to think a little bit about. So I just want to go over a couple of general rules for doing these types of problems. So how I always start is I look at the number at the top and I list out the pairs of numbers that would multiply to give you a 30. That's the easiest method, is to list out what numbers multiply to that number at the top. So how can I get a 30? Well, one thing you don't want to forget about is you could always have the number 1 and itself. So 1 times 30 is 30. 2 times 15, 3 times 10, let's see, we could have 5 times 6, right? Those are all pairs of numbers that give you 30. But there's only one pair of numbers that would add to a 13, and you can probably already see that it's going to be 3 and 10. All right, so 3 times 10 gives you 30, and 3 plus 10 gives you 13. So in Delta Math, you'll have these boxes here. You're just going to type in 3 and 10, and it shouldn't really matter the order. Sorry about that, got a little white out there. It shouldn't matter the order in which you type it in. So if you wanted to do 10 here and 3 here, it should still when you submit your answer, it should still mark you correct. All right. In the second example, okay, write two numbers that multiply to the value at the top, add to the value at the bottom. So we're going to multiply to 16. Add to, this time, do you notice we're adding to a negative number? So again, don't worry about the sign yet. Let's just figure out what numbers multiply to get 16. Well, I could have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and you could have 4 and 4. Now, if you remember, two positives can multiply to get a positive number. But don't forget that two negatives can also multiply to get a positive number. If I want to add to get a negative number, the only way I can add these numbers up to get a negative number is if both were negative. Negative times negative gives me positive. Negative times negative, positive. So if they're both negative, multiplying will give me the number I want at the top. But now if they're both negative, when I add them, I want to figure out which pair will give me a negative 10. Well, let's see, negative 1 plus negative 16, that's a negative 17, so I don't want that. Negative 2 plus negative 8, that gives me a negative 10, so that's the pair that I want. So if I had a negative 2 times a negative 8, I would get a positive 16, which is what I want. If I took a negative 2 plus a negative 8, I get that negative 10 at the bottom, which is also what I want. So my answers here are a negative 2 and a negative 8. So again, the order doesn't matter, all right? Just make sure that both numbers are negative. So these first two examples showed you what happened when you're multiplying to get a positive number at the top. All right, so anytime you're multiplying to get a positive number at the top, do you notice that both numbers are the same sign? You either have two positive or two negatives. So if you have a positive number at the top that you're multiplying, both numbers will have the same sign. And do you notice when you add to a positive number, they're both positive, but when we had to add to a negative number, they are both negative. So whatever sign you have at the bottom, right, that's going to tell you what the sign of your numbers should be. So the sign at the bottom tells you what sign both numbers should be. Okay? So to get to a positive, if you're multiplying to a positive, you're either going to have two positives or two negatives. The number at the bottom, if it's positive, that should tell you both numbers are positive. If the number at the bottom is negative, that should tell you that both numbers are going to be negative. Okay? Now, that took care of multiplying to get positive numbers, but let's look at what happens when we need to multiply to get to a negative number. Well, the only way to multiply to get to a negative number is to have one positive and one negative. That's the only way we can get to having a negative number. So that means in these two examples, our two numbers are going to be different signs. So one will be positive and one will be negative. So let's look at number 3. I want two numbers that multiply to negative 52 and add to 24. Now when the number's kind of big, you might want to use your calculator, all right? And I like to just kind of start, I don't worry about the sign yet. I just want to make numbers that multiply to get 52. And then what I'll do is put the sign in later. So if I were to kind of come up with a list of numbers that give me 52, don't forget about always starting with the number and itself. Sorry, the number 1 in itself. So 1 and 52. If I did 52 divided by 2, that's 26, so 2 and 26. All right, 52 divided by 3, you could just keep going, divide by 2, 3, 4, whatever. So if I divide by 3, that doesn't work. 52 divided by 4 gives me 13. All right, and you could just kind of keep this going, although we have hit a pair that's going to work here. So I'm going to stop here and kind of show you what we're going to do. So like I said, the only way for these to work, to multiply to a negative number, would be if, let's say I take the pair 1 and 52. I could either have negative 1 and 52, or I could have 1 and negative 52, right? Or for the pair 2 and 26, I could have negative 2 and 26, or 2 and negative 26. Or like I could have negative 4 and 13, or 4 and negative 13, right? So the negative could go with either number. So here's where we're going to check our addition. Well, if I add negative 1 plus 52, I get 51. If I add 1 plus negative 52, I get negative 51. So it's not going to be either of those pairs because I'm trying to get to a 24. So let's look at negative 2 and 26. If I do negative 2 plus 26, hey, I get 24. That works. Let's say you just accidentally double checked. Maybe you put the sign with the 26. If you do 2 plus negative 26, that gives you the negative 24. So we don't want that. All right, so you can see that because I wanted a positive 24, the bigger number has to be positive because positive 26 minus 2 will give you a 24. So my answers here are negative 2 and 26. All right, negative 2 times 26 gives you a negative 52, and negative 2 plus 26 gives me a positive 24. All right, so you can just play around, use your calculator, play around with the signs, but make sure your signs are correct when you go to submit that in Delta Math. Okay. My last example, I'm also multiplying to a negative number at the top. So write two numbers that multiply to the value at the top, negative 48, but this time they're going to add to a negative number. All right, so kind of like I just did at the top here, you know, I didn't worry about the signs until I was done. I just want to know what are numbers that would multiply to, how about just 48? All right, so I know 1 and 48. Okay, and again, if the numbers are a little too big, you use your calculator. 48 divided by 2, so that's 2 and 24. 48 divided by 3, 3 and 16. And hopefully what you're going to start to notice is that, you know, up here when I did negative 2 and 26, I was kind of subtracting, right? 26 minus 2 to give you a 24. So it's kind of like if you could subtract these numbers, which one's going to give you that 8 or negative 8 in our case? okay? Like 2 minus 24, 24 minus 2, that would give you a 22 or a negative 22, right? Or 1 minus 48 or 48 minus 1, that's going to give you like a negative 47 or a positive 47. So you start to get good at looking at that number sense and kind of doing that addition or subtraction in your head. Let's see, we also have 4 and 48 divided by 4 should be 12. And if you think about it, right, I mean, you could keep going here, but 12 minus 4 or 4 minus 12, aren't they 8 apart from each other? Can I get a negative 8 from them? So I could either have a negative 4 and a 12, or I could have a 4 and a negative 12. So let's see, negative 4 plus 12, that would give me an 8. 4 plus negative 12, that would give me a negative 8. So that's the pair that I want, 4 and negative 12, okay? Because 4 times negative 12 is a negative 48, and 4 plus negative 12 is a negative 8. So what you should start to notice here is that if you have a negative at the top, then you should have different signs. One number is positive and one number is negative. What you should also notice is that if you wanted to add to a positive number, the bigger number should be positive. If you want to add to a negative number, the bigger number should be negative, so that it kind of like gives it the sign, right? Negative 12 plus 4 would give it a negative 8. A 26 plus a negative 2 would make it positive because 26 is that bigger sign. So just a couple of rules to remember when you're multiplying to a negative. Right, if you have a negative at the top, one number is positive and one is negative, okay? And kind of depending on what's down here, all right, I kind of want to say give bigger number the sign of what is in the bottom of the X. Okay. All right, so if you want it to be a positive number at the bottom, make sure your bigger number is positive. If you want it to be a negative number at the bottom, make sure that bigger value, original bigger value, like 4 versus 12, make the 12 negative so it gives its sign to the number at the bottom.